Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm and Erik Skopil on the show today. We bring on a guest, Brandon Huffman, National Recruiting Editor for 247 Sports. Because, guys, believe it or not, National Signing Day is a week from tomorrow. It seems strange. December 3rd is a signing day, right smack dab in the middle of conference championship weekend. So we're going to get you caught up to speed on all things recruiting and Oregon recruiting specifically with Brandon. Brandon, let's first just do like a temperature check. Like, what? Usually, there's a couple weeks that kind of left in the cycle here. Where is just overall, not just Oregon general, but not in specifically, but just everywhere across the board? Like, is the craziness about to start, or does it feel lackluster here?
I want to say it's probably halfway between both. I think it's pretty unremarkable. It's pretty lackluster. We've now seen June become essentially the new January, and more people are making their decisions in that month with official visits taking place. And then, you get to February, you have signing day. Well, I think you get to that first week in July and guys are making their decisions. So, there's not a lot of drama left down the stretch with maybe a couple flips here and there. But then I say that, and then last week you had, Bryce Underwood flipping from LSU to Michigan. You have Huffman Longstreet flipping from A&M to SC. Julian Lewis flipping from USC to Colorado. And the one position that usually is the most stable in the cycle every year is quarterback. And you have 3 of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country all flipping. So is that a precursor of things to come? It could be. I just think recruiting has changed so much with NIL involved, and now with this early period. I mean, it's hard to get excited about the early signing period next week, knowing that you still got playoff or conference championship games a few days later. And I think people are more geeked out to see what happens with the portal 5 days after. So this is a very weird year, which maybe that's a prelude to things to come.
Brandon, I don't have this on our show notes, but Matt, I'm going to audible here on the Autzen Audibles.
Sure.
It feels appropriate.
Look at that.
What would you like if you were in charge of this recruiting in the signing period? Like, what would you do? Because I don't know if I like where we are right now in terms of the schedule. And Dan Lanning made it pretty clear he didn't like it either last week when he was asked about kind of the condensed nature, and like they're preparing for a conference championship game while also the busiest week of recruiting probably of the whole year.
Well, I mean, think about Oregon last year, Oregon and Washington both, and the schools are playing in their respective conference championship games. With those games on Fridays and Saturdays, they lost a weekend to host official visitors. And, Oregon had played in a couple of the previous Pac-12 championships. You lose that last weekend when with the way games are now set with official visits, on game weekend, so much more difficult to host. Now you lose an entire weekend, and then you got to turn around and the portal opens on that Monday, or you got to go do all the different, in-home visits. And so now you're moving that up. Like you're almost penalized for having a successful season because you lose that weekend. And so, just speaking to Oregon, like I know they've got an official visitor coming in this weekend that's scheduled right now is Zach Staskowski from Central Catholic. And then McKay Matson plans to take his official visit the following weekend after the Big Ten championship game. And that's the thing. It's like when you had the early signing period, maybe you had guys that would take an official in January, and they could sign in February. But now you're taking away those 2 weekends of in-home visits to try to seal the deal. And then, hey, we're going to sign these guys on Wednesday. You're playing your conference championship game on Saturday. And then Monday, half your roster might be leaving.
Yeah.
And good luck keeping those together. Oh, but also go look at everybody else's roster to see who's available. These coaches have a lot on their plate, and there's the pressure, and it's high. And then that doesn't even take into consideration, where, with all of that, you got to plan for your playoff opponent too. This isn't just a conference championship game. Now you got to start planning for a playoff game. And there's just so much on their plate, and the NCAA calendar keeps getting chopped more and more. So I can see why coaches are frustrated. It's like we had a good product. Why do we keep moving the goalposts here?
I guess to pivot off that, like Oregon's coming off a bye week.
Mm-hmm.
Very rare bye week, the second to last week of the season. And with the current construction the calendar is at from a recruiting standpoint, they sent their coaches across the country. I wonder, like, how much of a advantage could that be for Oregon and just any school that gets a bye week 2 weeks before the season's over to be able to go and do some of that recruiting with that normally is saved afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly helps. Now, I will say this, they couldn't start doing in-home visits until next week. So even going on the road is just getting FaceTime.
Sure.
It almost feels, when I was out on the road all fall at camps and visiting schools and I'd run into coaches, they were there looking at 26s and 27s. It's like the pin has been put into the 25 class. It's Sharpied, who was it? Seth Davis that always says that.
Yeah.
We pretty much Sharpied the 2025 class. And so, yeah, they're getting out, but they want to see those 20. There you go, Eric, always prepared.
Sharpie right here.
2026 is really where all the attention's turning to. But when you're in it at the last minute for some of these 25s that are starting to get cold feet, the place they committed in June, or, think about how many guys committed to Florida State, thinking that they're coming off a year where they were 13-1 and, potentially a playoff team. They committed there, and now both coordinators are fired. They're having a disastrous year. Mike Gravel's seat is getting hotter than ever. Guys we've seen Florida State's lost a couple of commits. Florida, where, hey, Billy Napier's on the hot seat. Now he's catching fire. And now the Gators are coming a sneaky team without Florida's flipping guys to them. And so you're never going to lose that. You're never going to lose the hot team, cold team loses or adds recruits. But that's where these coaches are now having to figure out, is it worth going after these last-minute 2025s? Do we really have a chance? If we can't get them in for a visit because it's Thanksgiving weekend and maybe they're going to this school, we've got a rivalry game, then we got a conference championship game, and they want to sign on Wednesday the 4th. And here's the other crazy part. We have a dead period starting on Sunday, and it goes until Friday. So we have guys that'll sign on Wednesday, but then schools could host official visitors the 7th and the 14th. So it's such a drunk calendar, and it impacts these coaches. And I think that's a big reason why until, I don't know what day you're posting this, but on Tuesday morning, the first Power 4 coach was fired. And it was November 26th. The first Power 4 head coach is fired because the calendar has really impacted when you can make a change at coach.
Yeah, it's I'm perplexed by it, to be honest. Let's jump into some individual guys. You had the story on Monday. Jaron Kiawe Sakaputeli has canceled his Georgia visit. First off, rate my pronunciation on his name and correct me as best as possible.
I'll give you a C. We'll go B- because you did read it phonetically. It's Jaron Kiawe with a V and Songo Politele. So there's an N that's not in there, that's in there. And trust me, I mean, I hosted his announcement to Cal. I had that one nailed, but I was calling him Kiawe myself for extended time. But you know what? That for when was he offered? A month ago? You're making Yauman's progress there, Eric.
Yeah, well, it's going to be like Mateo Uiagalelei, where it's going to take me probably 6 months to get this knocked out. But let's get into the recruitment here. Is it as simple as to say it's Oregon versus Cal, and kind of what's the latest here?
It's Oregon versus Cal. Right now, I think Cal might have swung him back towards them. I think, realizing that he's a priority at Cal has been something that has been why he hasn't decommitted in the first place. Georgia already had Ryan Montgomery. Oregon already had Akili Smith Jr. And a lot of times being that second quarterback, you might be more talented. You might be better. You might have, bloomed later, but you're still the second quarterback. And I think with Cal, they prioritized him early on. Ironically, Cal, he became available for Cal when their own quarterback commit, Robert McDaniel, flipped to Arizona in May, but they got a 4-month head start on Oregon. So right now, I like where Cal is sitting. That's why I haven't changed my prediction yet in the crystal ball, because I still thought Cal had enough of a lead, despite all the kind of the obvious signs pointing to Oregon, with Georgia coming in. But I feel like Cal has done enough, but will that be the case in 8 days from now? We'll see.
Speaking of Akili Smith, I mean, a guy that I think he's won the CIF Open Division State title in California this past weekend.
San Diego Open Division.
San Diego, yes. What's just been your impressions? Because his his career seems to have gone like in waves where
Mhm.
it's sky high and then he kind of dipped a little bit. But now it seems like our rankings kind of reflect a little bit, and on the field it does. He's now ascending again.
Mhm. And that's the great thing about the evaluation process, that you have multiple evaluation points where, you don't want to get too high off what a guy does on a t-shirt and short setting. You also don't want to get too low, but sometimes the rise was too quick and the drop was too precipitous. And, you ascended too quickly, but then you dropped too quickly. But then you have that whole senior year to kind of get back to being even. And you have your most. Some guys are really good in t-shirt and shorts, and trust me, the industry has fallen for those guys, but so has the NFL. NFL guys look great. I mean, not to throw a straight at Zach Wilson, but part of the reason Zach Wilson went in the top 2 was BYU was the only team on the West Coast playing football for the first 6 weeks of the 2020 season. And then, have you ever seen a quarterback have a terrible pro day? No, they're designed to make the quarterback look good. T-shirt, shorts, no pass rush, no defense, but the throws are going to look good. So the NFL scouts fall for it. College coaches fall for it. I mean, I remember, for all the guys that have looked good at the Elite 11, there's been a lot of guys that didn't do crap when they got to the NFL, and then or when they got to college even. And then you have, the Josh Allens of the world who were the late bloomers, and now they're turning out to be elite guys. It's a crapshoot, but I think you can get way too hot and cold on t-shirt and shorts. But I also think a lot of times, and this is where fans always have to measure success and be measured, is sometimes the film lies. You see that all the time. Film doesn't lie, but it does. You're playing against inferior competition a lot of time. I'm not at all saying that Akili Smith's playing inferior competition. Sure. I'm just using this, that like even sometimes big stats can be misleading, because you're putting up big stats and maybe you're not playing against great competition, or maybe you have an overwhelming amount of talent. And so it is a process. It's a long evaluation process. And why do you think the NFL has so much money invested into scouting and evaluation and personnel? And they've got 4 extra years of evaluation. So with Akili, a lot of it was based on the physical traits, the physical attributes, the bloodlines. Dad was a pro baseball player and an NFL football player, but Akili didn't necessarily have all the film early on in his career. Then he finally got, he got settled. And I think he's coming back to where he was at in the beginning, where like now he's showing, hey, this is a kid that can play. This is a kid that can play at the next level. You need more reps. I mean, that's the thing. Marcus Mariota is a unicorn, folks. The guy who only starts for 1 year and then becomes an elite college player. That's so rare. Why do you think quarterbacks transfer so much in high school nowadays? They want to be starting as freshmen. You're not going to see many Marcuses. Wait till their senior year. And I think that, in the case of Akili, it was just he needed those reps. He needed those live bullets on Friday nights. And as he's done that, and you're seeing with his senior film, is he's now showing why he was rated so high from the jump without a lot of context to kind of validate that.
I know he's a player Oregon fans are probably pulling for, and I won't say more than others necessarily, but with the legacy nature of the recruitment and him being committed so long and the physical traits, which I've talked to you about, are really stand out. Mm-hmm. That's going to be an interesting player to watch here. I want to move on to another guy, Jakeem Stewart, and I'm curious on, you've been doing this for a while. We see reclassifying take place in basketball kind of a lot. Football doesn't happen very often. This is a case of a kid who was right near the top of the 2026 rankings. He's now a 2025 kid. Oregon, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think a pretty good spot to maybe sign him. What's your perspective on a kid reclassifying like this and moving up? Can you think of many success stories? Because off the top of my head, I couldn't think of a ton of them.
Oh, did you guys know that Ryan Williams is only 17 years old? I don't know if that's come up on any broadcast this year.
It's that's the new Brock Osweiler is 6'8".
And Adam Morrison has diabetes, and Colt McCoy and Jordan Shipley were roommates. Yes, it's the new thing. Ryan Williams, but it's like for every Ryan Williams, you have a JT Daniels. 4 colleges later, his best year in college was his freshman year, and USC went 5-7 that year and didn't make a bowl game. Tony Grimes went to North Carolina, reclassified, didn't really do a whole lot. So the irony of this is that Ryan Williams was probably the least physically ready. If you just look at him on the hoof, you wouldn't say that guy's going to be able to reclassify up a year and be dominant. It's usually these guys are kind of the physical freaks of nature. Probably a good comp to Jakeem Stewart was Donnell Wilson, who I think he was in the 2020 class. He was originally supposed to be in the 2021 class. And maybe I may have the wrong last name, but he was committed to Texas A&M or committed to LSU, ended up reclassifying a year and ended up transferring, just never quite got there. So it is a risk. That said, I remember at the Under Armour camp in Los Angeles in March of 2023, where Jakeem Stewart shows up at registration, and one of the guys was doing check-in said, "Hey, do you know who this Jakeem Stewart is?" He says he's from LA. I'm like, "No." It's like, "Well, he's here," and he sends it down. I'm like, "That kid is definitely not from LA. They don't have guys that look like that in LA." Well, he's from Louisiana. That's where the LA came from.
Right.
And he was the 247 Sports alpha dog that day as a freshman. And he was physically dominating everybody that was 2 years older than him. So it might not be as big of a leap for him, but it's always a calculated risk that for every Ryan Williams, you have a Tony Grimes or a
Kyler Casper.
Kyler Casper, a JT Daniels, that it probably would have behooved him to go to college for another year.
On the other side of the ball, you mentioned him earlier, Zach Staskowski. From Central Catholic, Portland kid, committed to Minnesota, flipped to Washington. That's where his commitment holds now. But Georgia's thrown their hat in the ring. Oregon has certainly thrown their hat in the ring, and they're getting him on campus this weekend. Just, you've seen him in person. What's led to his kind of blow up? This happens every year. There's always maybe 2 or 3 guys that blow up. But why is he one of those rare players who's drastically elevated his game?
I'm gonna do a shout out to our guys Chris Hummer and Matt Zennis. They wrote a great article today on how the portal is going to be a SHIT show. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on your podcast. And one of the positions that they said it's going to be the hardest to pull from and the hardest to find, and the sport is really suffering right now, is offensive line. And you don't see a lot of good offensive linemen in the portal, and it's why they're commanding such huge rates. That's my long-winded way of answering. Zach is kind of what you're looking for in offensive lineman. Kind of, he's probably playing 250, 240, 250 as a junior, starting to get bigger and stronger. But, you guys live in the Northwest. You guys live in Oregon. It's not like Portland is Grand Central Station for elite players. And it really started in June when he was the MVP. Matt, I know you were there at the Northwest Showcase. And he got his MVP, the O-line MVP at that, committed to Minnesota, I believe a week later, without visiting anybody else. Then he got the Washington offer, flipped. Then his senior year started. And such growth happens between November, December of your junior year till spring of your senior year, but really till the spring of your senior year to the fall of your senior year, there's even more growth. Because coaches we talked about this earlier, with coaches moving the calendar up earlier, senior year development almost becomes pointless. Well, you have a case of a guy like Zach, who his senior year was his best year. And shortly after the start of the season, I sent a text to the scouting team. I said, "Hey, dude, Zach Staskowski is freaking awesome. I even told his trainer, I'm like, dude, he's an asshole. Like, he's out there and he's like taking glee in driving these defensive linemen from Hawaii back 20 yards and playing through the whistle and well after the whistle." Oregon offers him, Georgia offers him, Michigan offers him. He took an official to Michigan this last week and took one to Georgia the weekend before that. He's at Oregon this weekend. Washington's holding out, trying to hold on to him. But a guy that just got better from Thanksgiving weekend last year when his last game of his junior season was played until September and has gotten better each week. There are still guys out there that can do that.
I wonder if this is another guy who's going to take a step here, or what you've seen from him. That's Dimitri Manning, a guy who I think we talked about him back in the summer, maybe when he had committed recently, and just kind of the upside there. And just physically, he looks the part. What's his season been like? And is this still somebody that you think is on the ascent?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I went and saw him. It's funny because Biggins and I were talking about him the other day. And, the thing with Meach is he was always bigger than everybody else. And that's great in high school. And when you're in the Bellevue wing tee, that's nice and all, but you got to be able to not just be big, but you've got to be agile. You've got to be athletic. You've got to show, that it's not just size, but that you can do all those little things. And to Meach's credit, this guy worked his tail off to get into great shape. I mean, he's still this massive kid. He's got an 83-inch wingspan. I think he's got like 10.5-inch hands. Like, He's what you look like, what an NFL lineman looks like after 4 years of college football. Meach always had the size, but he didn't necessarily have the technique. He didn't have the nasty. Well, something clicked in him. Really started like last December when I saw at the All-American Combine in January. You started to see this edge, and it took all the way through the spring. And Matt, you were at the Under Armour camp in April, where he just threw a D lineman down, and then he kind of stood over him and flexed. I was like, where the hell did that come from? And so I was at their second game of the season this year against Lake Stevens. And it was a match with the two defending state champions, and his teammate, their starting tailback, tore his ACL on a play. And for whatever reason, it just pissed Meach off. And it happened inside the red zone. And it was like watching The Blind Side. He just took a defensive lineman back. He was so angry that his teammate got hurt. And it wasn't a dirty play. It just he was trying to cut inside on the sideline to get back inside, and his body got overturned. But you could see it like pissed him off. And he has been playing like an angry guy for the rest of the season. He wouldn't be a guy I'd be shocked about if he ends up becoming a 4-star in the end. And, he's a legit candidate for the state player of the year, which is rare for offensive linemen, but he's made such a jump from his junior to senior year. And I think that's a player who you may need a year to teach him how to pass block, because when you're at Bellevue in the wing tee, you're not doing a lot of pass protection. But the upside that he has is immense.
College football after this season shifting to a 105-man roster limit. You can have 105 scholarship players if you want. You can have the traditional 85 and take 20 walk-ons. How do you feel like that's going to impact roster size? Like Oregon right now has 16 verbal commitments. You look at the guys that they're still involved with whether it's trying to hold on to or flip or the uncommitted guy. Probably a safe estimate is probably they're going to add 4 to 6 more guys between now and signing day. So it's going to be a smaller than your normal recruiting class. How do you feel like this 105 limit is going to impact college football in general? Because as we did with Lanning previously, like he signed 33, 34, 35 guys in the high school ranks the last couple of years. And I guess you could do that, but that's just going to lead to a huge purge every year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very fascinating. You're already seeing some coaches kind of getting out in front of it and talking about how this is going to impact them. Matt Rule's been very outspoken about it. And, it's funny because Nebraska forever under Tom Osborne. I don't know if any of you people that listen to this remember who Tom Osborne was, or if we're aging ourselves, but they prided themselves on their outstanding in-state walk-ons, and guys that just dreamed of playing for Nebraska and playing for the Huskers would turn down other opportunities to go play at Nebraska. And they had a number of walk-ons turn out to be stars. It's going to limit that. There still are walk-ons that become really good players. I think Carson Schlesinger is a Butkus Award finalist at UCLA. He was a walk-on. I'm going to butcher his last name, but Bryce
Betcher.
Betcher. There you go. Butcher Betcher. If I remember right, he was a walk-on because of being a baseball player. There's still guys like that, but I don't think there's the patience for walk-ons as there was, years ago, when guys can have an opportunity to come in and play right away. You're trying to fill your roster with the portal. So it's going to be very fascinating. I think you're going to still see some schools that, even if they have NIL to take care of essentially the tuition and the housing for a walk-on, they would rather use that money differently. I don't know that it's going to have a huge impact on the top 25, top 30 schools. I think it's going to really impact kind of that middle tier, and maybe even those G5 schools. But I think if anything, if you're a college coach at a Power 5 program and a major Power 5 program, honestly, would you rather babysit 125 guys or 120 guys or 105 guys? And if you're Georgia, that's 15 less drivers on the road.
Okay. I will not react to that one. This is off recruiting, but you live up in the Seattle area. You're somewhat familiar with this Washington team. I don't know if you're aware, Oregon and Washington are about to play a football game in 5 days.
It's not Apple Cup or Civil War weekend?
It sure isn't. Those are now in September, which is another discussion. You've probably seen this UW team maybe a little more than we have. So just give us a sense of I don't want to ask you to tell us if you think that they're capable of beating Oregon, but like what stands out from this Washington team, and kind of how do you think they maybe match up with Oregon?
Well, I kind of figure like they have a little bit more of an identity, if you will, offensively, at least in the second half. I covered the UCLA UW game, and Damon Williams, once they went to Damon Williams, it was like the offense just opened up. Do they go with a guy who's never started a college game in their biggest game of the year on the road against a team that's trying to, put a perfect regular season together? Do you stick with the fifth-year senior who's gone into SEC environments and hasn't been overwhelmed, but then they haven't went on the road this year either? What is it, the bowl that Jed Fish makes a decision to go with the young guy, or does he stick with Will Rogers? So that's going to be, to me, that's so much what hinges on what kind of outcome this game has. I would say, Oregon has done a good job of, to quote my good buddy Dan Rubenstein, winning their clunkers. They've done a good job of that, and I don't necessarily think Washington's going to be a clunker, but that's a team that's going to throw everything they had. They won the last 3 games, even though the cast of characters have changed. There's still going to be, Jed Fish knows that's a rivalry. He's not immune to that fact. It's just, I feel like Oregon just has a decided advantage almost everywhere positionally in that game. Plus the plan for something big. Now, the reality is this isn't even the biggest game that Oregon's playing in the next 10 days. That'll take place the weekend after in Indianapolis, and that determines if they get a bye or if they are hosting a game in, mid-December. But there's enough players on that Oregon roster, even though most of those guys on Washington weren't there or weren't contributing. There's plenty of guys on those Oregon roster that remembers those last 3 games and how it kept them out of the playoffs. So I think just the motivating factor alone, certainly combined with the overwhelming talent advantage at every position, sends that to Oregon. But what do they say about rivalry games? You got to throw those records out the window.
What's been your take? I guess the last question I've got for you is kind of sticking with the theme here. But what's your view of Washington and Oregon on the recruiting trail? Are these 2 programs still going after and having the same legitimate chance of getting the same player, or are they going in different directions right now?
I mean, they're both trending up in recruiting, and which is Oregon has been since, really Willie Taggart took over. Yeah. There's been a kind of a, perpetual ranking in the top 10, top 15, going through Taggart to Cristobal to now Lanning, whereas Washington has had its peaks and valleys. Chris Peterson had his system of how he did things. Jimmy Lake, nobody knows what the hell his system was, but it didn't work. Then you had Kalen DeBoer, and it was kind of like, we're going to focus on the portal. Then Fish, and we're going to go back in recruiting. So Washington's got a top 20 class. They've done well. Obviously Vander Ploeg flipping from Washington to Oregon was something. But I think they're going after different types of players. I think Oregon is really focusing on a national appeal and Southern California, whereas Washington's kind of going after those Northwest guys with the commitment of Austin Simmons from West Albany High School today. That's now 4 players in the state of Oregon that are committed to Washington. And at the time of their commitment, none of them had an offer from Oregon when they committed to the Huskies. Obviously, Zach Siskowski now does. So Oregon is, focusing on those guys in Texas and the Midwest and the South, whereas Washington saying, okay, well, we'll go on those Northwest guys that aren't being recruited by Oregon. We'll go after some of the NorCal and SoCal guys. And I think both are doing a great job in high school recruiting.
That's all I had, Matt.
Okay. I was just going to ask one more, follow-up of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's 4 Oregon guys. You brought them up. Austin Simmons and Baron Noone is the 2 that, to me, outside of Zach, are kind of like Oregon really needs a tight end, and they've never really shown interest there, which is strange to me.
Yeah. It was interesting. I thought with Barron, especially given the West Lynn ties with the Oregon program, with, Anthony Newman, with Alex Molden, obviously they're recruiting they're recruiting Josiah Molden pretty heavily. Jake Normoyle, his dad's the offensive line coach. He had an early Oregon offer. He's going to Oregon State. You've got a couple of former Ducks on that staff. It was coached by a former Duck. Chris Miller was, I think, the head coach Barron's freshman year at West Lynn. And, so he's the one that I loved, AJ, and I'm blanking on his name because I'm sick. Pugliano, who was an in-state recruit that they brought in a year ago. I think Barron's a further along prospect at the same stage and just a better all-around football player. Plus, he's healthy. AJ definitely got hampered by injuries. So I would have thought he would have naturally been a target. But, with Vanderploeg, with Simmons, he didn't have any Power 4 offers until Sunday night when he got the Washington offer, or Saturday night. But I think the one that'll be the most interesting in all this will be Barron, because him and Vander were pretty closely rated, and Vander was the guy that Oregon went in on, and not Barron. And I think that'll be kind of a fascinating one to watch, because, Oregon, and understandably so, this isn't to knock the state of Oregon's football talent, but when you are a national brand, you've got the ability to go into certain regions of the country, go there, because Oregon's got really good high school football, but it's not a lot of depth elite-wise at the top, or even the top 10 guys, although this year is actually a pretty good class. I understand why they went after Vanderploeg, and, by not going after Barron, that's not going to hurt your chance with Josiah Bolden. Did I mention that his dad played at Oregon and his mom went to Oregon? Granted, his brother went to Washington, but it's a different type of recruitment where I don't think that's going to have a negative impact, because they still have recruited Westland pretty well.
Brandon, thanks for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate it. Good luck to you this week, getting ready for signing day. Until the next show, we'll love to have you on down the road.
Thanks, fellas.
Thanks, Brandon.